Wow. I might not recover from that introduction. Could we just go around the room real quickly and maybe just give your name and your interest? Because I know it's really important that we cross-pollinate, and there's some amazing people here that I know, and there's some amazing people here that I don't know. So Bart, you want to just...
I am Bart Bilmer. I'm with the Reuther Library and also the Detroit Sound Conservancy, so interested in conserving Detroit Sound.
I'm Michael Betzold. I'm a Detroit area freelance journalist, former Detroit Free Press reporter.
Barry Neville. I just retired from what used to be library and information science. And I'm primarily a book historian.
I'm Leslie Edwards. I'm the head archivist at Cranbrook Archives.
I'm Laura McNeeman, and I'm Archives Assistant at Cranbrook Archives.
I'm Ashley Bernard. I'm just a student here. I'm Veronica Johnson. I'm a recent MLIS grad from Wayne State with a focus on archive administration.
My name is Samgeeta Gopalakrishnan, and I'm the director of the Foreign Language Technology Center. And I work with Kim on the Ethnic Layers of Detroit project, and we're part of the DHAT at Wayne group as well.
I'm Miriam Billy, and I'm just a student that's interested in teaching.
I'm Chris Darb. I'm a colleague of Kim's in the iSchool.
And I'm Pamela Galloway. I work here at the university, and I just have a general interest in history, and I spend a lot of time at the archives in the various cities.
I'm Gerald Vogt, an independent researcher.
Ed Ross, my biggest story is I'm a resident librarian for international studies at U of M. I studied under Kim, and I've worked on several more history projects here in Detroit.
Let's hit people in the back.
I'm Allison Stancroft, and I'm the University Archivist here at Wayne State, and I'm a Wayne grad.
I'm also Allison, but Greenlee, and I'm the Special Collections Metadata Librarian here.
Oh, I'm there. I'm just a student here.
Shreya, I'm a grad student in Learning Design, Technology, and Education program. Sue?
Yeah, Shu from Computer Science.
I'm Laura Shedley, and I'm in Information Sciences, where Ken is.
I'm Kimberly Shea. I'm a PhD student in anthropology.
I'm Natalie Walker. I'm a student in the
Eric Ash, professor of history.
Deborah Peak. I'm a friend of Kim Schroeder's and born and raised Detroiter, and incessantly avid fan of Detroit music and follow it with many of my musician friends. So.
My name is Reverend David Shaw. I'm a independent spiritualist minister at a church in Ferndale called the Center of Enlightenment, and music speaks to me, and through it I speak to my congregation. I chaired the service this past Sunday, and it took me 2.5 hours to pick the 3 songs that were perfect for the service. So it's important to me.
ML Liebler, English department. I've been known to enjoy a Detroit music song.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you. I'm very impressed with who's here, and I really hope that you'll feel free to pipe in. I don't profess to be a Detroit music expert, but I want to share with you some of the things that we've learned through these oral histories. So these are some of the brief highlights as to what kind of piqued my interest about diverting the class to covering this topic. So I really am very interested in the pride that we need to have to better instill in the city of Detroit. And so we've forgotten a lot of our history and gotten really wrapped up in a lot of the important but negative things. And I also want to document some of the amazing inventiveness from the city. And so a long time ago, I became very aware that, you know, we were the biggest sheet maker manufacturer, music sheet maker, you know, at one time. So we've just been involved with history and music for a long time. And so I was interested in the roots, and so I was looking at all of these things. And so when I began teaching the oral history class, I really wanted to make sure it was meaningful. That I understand that through teaching this class, we are documenting the historic record and enriching it. And we're giving a voice to traditionally some that don't have a voice. And so the first year I had my class interview primarily activists in the city, which is what I'm familiar with. So we interviewed some leaders in Southwest Detroit, environmental justice folks, and it was really lovely, and the class discussion is amazing in a class. So I really had a great time. I'm typically more comfortable in analyzing surveys and big data, and so this was more a personal, one-on-one, story-by-story education for all of us, and so it was a little bit more of an analysis leap for me. What we see in those stories is that it definitely confirms that Detroit is the biggest small town, which you've probably all heard that phrase, because as we're seeing these links, we've got 20 music-oriented oral histories now, and you see them refer to each other even when we might not know initially that they had any knowledge of each other. And one of the things that I heard from Melvin Davis, who I've become very close to through doing the surveys, is that he complimented our class in that we're not just documenting Detroit musicians, but the impact that Detroit musicians have had on global music, which is something I really hadn't considered initially. And it is coming to fruition as I see their stories come through. So what I did was this chart, and I know you all can't see that in the back for sure, but it's hard to fit everything in. It's actually 2 screens. But I started to put a chart together because, you know, I have a degree in library and information science. I need to organize things. So I was trying to sort of label things, and I realized that this chart is probably for the most part fairly insulting to the people that we're interviewing, because you can't really lump them into genres. I put maybe some of their most popular genres that you might know them for, but it really doesn't do them service. And I started putting in, well, they're a musician, and then I say, well, they also arrange their music. Well, they also say that they do production work, so, you know, etc. And so this is just a first stab at it, but it needs to be enhanced. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the folks that we've interviewed. So what we did is we tried to do a really big cross section. So we didn't just get stuck in the 1960s, and so we're interviewing some folks that are trying to make it now, some of the leading local artists. So we did, we've been doing as many genres as we can. So like Addie Baranek, who's the lead singer of the Sights. It's a rock and roll band you might have heard of. He also teaches at the School of Rock. So we've been getting his input about why he stays in the area, could he make it bigger somewhere else, so that some of the types of questions we've asked them. And then we've got amazing people, for instance, you know, we've got people that played at Woodstock, we've got people that have Emmys, we've got people that have Grammys. Dennis Coffey, you might know, he's certainly very distinguished and received an award of that at the Detroit Music Awards in the past. And he was a session player at Motown, as well as, you know, does a lot of variety in his genres, and he played with Melvin Davis as well. Melvin Davis likes to label his genre Northern Soul, and they just held a conference, you might be aware of, a big concert in the fall, where people came from all over the world, and there were a lot of people from Europe in town for a huge concert that they had for Northern Soul. And there were folks everywhere. I know there were people that were only speaking Polish at the Blues Club that night. A bunch of people from Poland came in. So it's really well known. And one of the things that Melvin Davis has told me that is sort of earth-shattering to him, because he had to ultimately give up music for a time because he couldn't make enough money at it. And he was delivering mail, you know, for years. And when he retired from the post office, he started touring in Europe, and people were singing every word to his songs. And he doesn't get that here. And so he started to be aware of the fact that he and Detroit have had a bigger impact around the world than they know. how many people are familiar with the Rodriguez story? With Searching for Sugar Man, right? So, you know, he lives in my neighborhood. I see him around campus. And, you know, he would tell people working as a carpenter in buildings, you know, hey, I'm a rock star in South Africa. And, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, right. But in actuality, it was true. And he is a very humble man, but he had a huge impact on areas outside of Detroit as well. But the Detroit vibe, as it will, was grown here. We also worked with some of the really strong Americana or folk folks that are in the area. So they're a very tight-knit group. So John Freeman, who also is a poet and teaches at Oakland University, his book of poetry has come out, and it's getting really amazing acclaim. And he also plays traditional Irish music as well with the Codgers. And Mike Gilbraith is also an independent singer-songwriter, and he has a new single out that's doing really well. It wouldn't surprise me if he goes beyond the local market. Brad Hales, you might be aware of. So he's a musician, but he also is I don't know if I call it amateur, might be an insult to him, but he's a Detroit music historian and owner of People's Records. So you might be familiar with him. And he's also got a very extensive collection. He's trying to put a museum together. So he's got a lot of insight about the music industry here over time. We had a lot of fun with Pep Harris, who did one of the main versions. There's two main versions that were commercially viable in the 60s and 70s, and that was Smiling Faces. You might be familiar with that song. Unfortunately, the impact of that song never goes away. So his band, The Undisputed Truth, still plays, and he actually had to run out of our interview to go to a recording session because he's cutting a new album. So these folks are tireless. There's no retirement for people with this kind of skill. And then Chuck Stiles, or CJ Stiles is his nickname, he was founder of the Soulful Sonics, and then it became Pure Pleasure, and they actually had a hit single on the radio called By My Side. It's on YouTube if you want to play it. But I interviewed him because he was a phenomenal blues musician, and I saw him when I was out and about at the Raven. And if you haven't been to the Raven, it is advertised as the oldest blues club in Michigan. And he was obviously amazing, and only then did I find out all of this back history with him after I sat down to talk with him. So he's still active, obviously, and McKinley Jackson, who has an amazing intellectual insight about the music industry in Detroit, and I'll share a clip from him in a moment. But he is currently the musical director of the Temptations, and he's had a long history. He had a band. I was playing his music from the 70s called The Politicians, which was kind of like Afro-punk and psychedelic from the 70s. So let me just go on to the next screen. Almost done. So we also interviewed Pat Lewis, who's a friend with Melvin Davis. She actually sang backup on Shaft. So, yeah. She's toured with George Clinton. She's been asked to, sing at the White House. So she's very well-known, very well-established, and she actually had a singing group, I see a typo, called The Adorables with some of her sisters in the 60s. We also are trying to continue to add in more female musicians, and we were privileged to interview Galen McKinney, who's the daughter of Harold McKinney, who's a famous musician in his own right, and her mother was a classically trained singer as well. But she's Grammy nominated, and she's a female drummer, which is really unusual, and she's played with Shaka Khan. So you see her diversity. We also interviewed some folks with classical bent, so we had a really great story from Sharon here, who talked about seeing Orchestra Hall. She was here at Wayne State being trained as a musician, and her professor took her to Orchestra Hall before and after the renovation to sort of see the difference. So it was really interesting from a musician's standpoint about her impact, about the impact of redoing that, what many say is an acoustically perfect hall. And Paul Reiser was amazing. He was the arranger for Motown. So he actually arranged the majority of both inside and outside Motown, a lot of hits that you heard from the 60s and 70s, and he is still working with Stevie Wonder on his new album, actually. And he's connecting us with some more people to interview, but amazing talent. Matt Smith, who is involved, he's the lead singer of Outrageous Cherry, which is a really well-known band, and he has an interesting story about why he stayed in Detroit and didn't stay out in LA. R.J. Spangler, if you're familiar with the Sun Messengers, he was co-founder of that in the 80s and continues to play with many musicians. We also had a DSO violinist in the 60s. She would do performances at the DSO. She worked for the DSO, and then after the DSO, they would go over to Motown and be session musicians to help enrich the volume and tone of some of the hits that we knew from Motown era. So that was an interesting story. We also interviewed Susie Wall, who had a place at Palmer here called Cafe Detroit in the late 70s and early 80s, and this was a new story to me. We met through mutual friends, but it was really interesting to hear her take on the music scene in Detroit at that time, and she had this great story about Marcus Belgrave sneaking into her bar. He was underage, but he wanted to play, so he would sneak in to perform. And then the one who started this all was really audio engineer at Motown, Ed Wolfram, he was in the room for basically every single master Motown song that you heard. And he has story about sneaking around behind Berry Gordy's back to record what's going on, because Berry Gordy only wanted positive, sort of, bubblegum music to come out of Motown. He wasn't really ready to take political stances on things. And my understanding is that song is still the #1 highest selling Motown song to date. So they were all scared they were going to get fired until you heard the song, and that sold them on it. So a lot of interesting stories, more to be done. So that, I promise I won't bore you with any more charts. So for my students that were working with musical folks, I asked them to do one thing: get at this topic of why they feel there's been so much talent in Detroit. That is not an if question, it's a definitely a why and how. So in their own phrasing, they've asked that question or approximated that question throughout all of the oral histories, and so that's allowed me to put together the presentation for today. So because I'm used to doing larger survey work, I obviously can't trend this. We interviewed folks with varying genres, socioeconomic status, varying decades of performance, and certainly very different personalities. But it is interesting when we look at their stories in full and to see why they think that Detroit has been so important. So I know you can't read that, but the good thing is I have a clip here I'm going to play from McKinley Jackson, who once again is the Temptations musical director and a phenomenal musician. Oh, we can't hear that. Let me see. This is my student Maurice Drummond. Oh wait, I can't turn up the volume. Wait a minute. Can you hear that?
Composer, orchestrator, arranger, and skilled musician.
Can you hear?
He has been described by his artistic peers and followers alike as one of the greatest talents to come out of Detroit and a musical genius and legend. This interview is about Mr. Jackson's contribution to the development of the Detroit sound. Welcome, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I want to start with a basic question, which is pretty loaded. What is it about Detroit that develops so many talented musicians?
I have thought about this in reference to the Detroit sound, Chicago sound, the Memphis, the Southern sounds, the Philadelphia sound. I come up with a thing where I think when guys grow up together, breathe the same air, eat the same food, walk in the same soul, they build up. It's just my opinion. They build up a certain, whether they know each other or not, a certain aesthetic relationship to the location that they grow up in. and this is true probably in Philly, I'm sure it's true in the South and Chicago, they all have a little different slant. Same note, same B flat, but they have a different interpretation of it, excuse me. But I've always thought of that way. Naturally, Detroit, we've been supplying the music world great artists for a long time, even before Motown, whether people believe it or not.
Okay.
Going back to Donald Byrd, Barry Harris, Kurt Lysley, some of the great jazz, Marcus Belgrave, Marcus Settled here, but he's a Detroiter in my mind. So I don't know. I just always thought the collectiveness of the music, the spirit, and the environment. You know, just kind of give us a collective viewpoint out. You know, and that's communicated to the musician. Naturally, music is about having a conversation, and this is translated in the conversation.
Okay. It's like the conversation of the collective makes the sound.
It makes the sound.
Okay.
You know, we speak the same language with the same dialect.
That's important.
So it's not like the Babel. We're not all like the Babylons about the tower, you know. But I think that's valid.
Okay.
That's my personal opinion. I think it's valid.
Okay. So for your personal journey, what was life like growing up in Detroit before and after Motown? Because you mentioned Detroit before Motown, so how did you fit into the music scene?
Well, actually, I was much younger.
Okay.
Because I was going to Motown. My first record there was 1963, which was Ooh Baby Baby with Smokey Robinson and Miracles. Okay. And I skipped school to do that. I skipped Northern High School to go do the session at Motown because I think Paul Reiser was a trombonist with George Mohannan and maybe Don White. But Paul started writing more and more arranging. Okay. And so I kind of got in there as a trombonist. But before that was, like I say, that was like 63, so those were sessions. And I got to do more and more. But before then, I was working around town because back at that point in time, Detroit had a studio on at least every 3 blocks. It was a recording studio.
Wow.
Whether it was Popcorn Wiley's on 12th Street, Continental, whether it was Ernie Burt on Grand River, whether it was Mike Hanks on the Boulevard, and before the Boulevard, there's McGraw, right down the street from
near like the Tireman,
right down the street from the Olympics.
Okay.
I remember seeing all these people walking when I used to get mics. I was younger then, even younger. Okay. And I would, I don't know where they were going. They were going to see the Beatles. I hadn't even heard of the Beatles. You know, I said, going to see the Beatles. What is this, anthropology?
Library on the campus of Wayne State University. Mr. Jackson is library on the.
There you go. So I wanted Mr. Jackson to sort of paint that picture for you himself, which is about what he saw, that there were so many venues and outlets for the musicians. He said at one point in the interview that he used to walk down the street just carrying his trombone. He said people would say, "Do you play trombone?" And he would say, "Well, why would I be carrying a trombone, if I don't play? I'm ready to play at any moment." And you could just sort of duck into a session, just kind of hang out if that's, where you wanted to be. So when you hear that picture, you realize, the energy level and power of music that was happening in Detroit that kind of set the tone also for Motown. This is a quote from Ed Wolfram, who said, "All these guys were just so ridiculously talented, and each one added something to that Motown or Detroit sound experience. Because there was more than Motown going on. I mean, Motown was just one of the many record companies in that area." So I know there were hundreds I've seen, if you follow sort of the flow chart, as it were, of record companies coming and going, much like the explosion we had in the car industry. We had lots of car manufacturers pop up and drop back during that height. And this man, I believe, is it Marugu? I never can pronounce his name. Maruga, thank you so much. He is quite a lovely character, and he said, that was the atmosphere, like you could entrepreneur the music. It was the beginning. Detroit was a haven for music and art and creativity and invention. It was the place in the universe. Detroit, what should really, really be proud of, this here and all kinds of stuff was going on. And he is still really involved with the music. He still teaches drumming to kids. He lives out in the Ann Arbor area. But he had some really wonderful stories also about, after playing Woodstock, coming back and helping drug-addicted teens get off drugs. So, I mean, there were side stories too that you learn about what was going on in the city and the efforts that were happening through folks that really cared about their community. Here's a quote from Dennis Coffey. He still plays on Tuesday nights in town, every Tuesday if you want to hear him. And I've got a clip of his music at the end. And so he said, so our music was molded by the people coming to hear us play. It was very Detroit-centric. It was a regional sound that just went worldwide with Motown, because Barry was, as far as I'm concerned, a genius to put it all together. And I told Barry Gordy a couple of years ago, you were the first one to step up and realize the talent that was in Detroit, that was defined by the culture of Detroit, and do something with it. And Barry Gordy told me I could never have started Motown Records in any other city but Detroit because of the talent I found here. He also mentioned in the interview that it was Detroit music entrepreneurship that really led to developing the talent. So he also said that he felt that the talent is still here in the town, that we still have an amazing amount of talent because it's in the DNA of our town, that you can always find the best players, and I'd put these players up against any other city. Best jazz players, R&B, funk, everything. And you've got Kid Rock, and I met Kid Rock. I have not met Eminem, but I was at one of his studios, I think before he sold it. But Louis Resto, and a keyboard player, he plays with Eminem, and he's playing on my albums, and I've been with him before. But you just look, Bob Seger, Detroit still has the talent, Motown, and everybody else in between. So considering these musicians have traveled all over the world, for them to still say that, and we heard that again and again and again in the interviews, that people felt like the talent and the creativity was still here, and so that enriched their work, and so they chose to stay and to continue to work here. Here's Melvin Davis, who has been dubbed the Detroit Soul Ambassador, and sometimes he'll sign a note to me, DSA. He has a lot to say. He's really thought a lot about this, and so he said, I guess it was slowly being embedded in me that music and Detroit were synonymous, and that there was a lot of talent here and a lot of musical creativity, and people were very innovative to take music to the next step to where it was going. It was a very sharp edge, a breaking of what they would call race music to a more professional, more crossover appeal. Of course, Barry Gordy and Motown did a great job with that, but before that, it was just called race music. So that was an important delineation, and we've certainly heard that. If you've seen the Funk Brothers documentary, they talk about that as well, that they were playing initially, for instance, in venues in the South where the black audience members were up on the balcony and the white members were down on the main floor, and then a few years later they would go back and everybody was together. And so it was breaking those barriers, which is, the power of music. Melvin also has some other quotes saying that he thinks that he gets frustrated when they say Detroit's dead. He saw a newspaper article about that, and he goes on to talk about that his generation are the teacher that music is the teachers and we are the students, and we have good in both. Detroit will rise again and continue rising. So he's a real proponent of the city. Pep Harris talked to us. This was a really great quote. I should have grabbed this clip, but he said, the year that Otis Redding died, Martha Jean came to Detroit. In fact, we were in my car, and manager at the time, Pete Hall and Roger Brown with the Lions, went to get her. And through Martha Jean and all the way up through the riots, after the riots, Detroit was no longer a musical mecca because it was part of the systematic system where he used system on the black side gets to the point where they tear it down. So his feeling was that through what happened in '67, that a lot of that was torn apart because the black community had gotten so successful that the white infrastructure needed to take it down a peg. So these kinds of really important discussions can come from these oral histories as well. And it's another reason why I'm so thankful that we're able to give voice to folks that live through this experience and have interpretations. And I don't want this to get lost when they pass on. It's really important for us to look at that. So, Mike Galbraith, who is a current singer-songwriter, talks to us about how he moved out of Detroit initially when he wanted to make it, and he moved to Chicago, and he lived some other places, and he felt that in Chicago it was kind of, every person for their own, and so they were not building each other up, and that the sense of community in Detroit is why he came back. And we heard that a lot from these interviews, that people had lived other places and they came back because they're so supportive. And I know if you travel in that circle for Americana or folk music in the area, you will see that all the musicians come to each other's shows and they all support each other's and record release parties. They're all there supporting each other, and it's close camaraderie that will pull people on the stage. And so it's not shine the spotlight on me, it's really a community. And that is certainly a great place to gestate music. And so it's really beneficial for them, and they do some amazing work. We spoke also to Jackie Clipper, who's an amazing singer. She sings at the Raven, among other places. She does pretty much every genre. And when we asked her kind of what's phenomenal, why phenomenal musicians are here, her take on it was Motown. She said that's what the city was generated on, Motown cars, automobiles. And she felt like the guys working in the factory were trying to be singers at Motown, and it was just in our blood, and she was born and raised here. So that was her feeling, was everything came from Motown. And again, it really depends on your age as to kind of your interpretation of that question. We asked Chuck C.J. Styles Jackson, who also plays with Jackie, what was the music industry like in Detroit when you began, and he talks about the heavy dose of Motown for sure. But he talks about, the UK being such a big consumer of Detroit music, and that when he got his hit record, it was amazing because in 2 days his song started being played on the radio, and so that was obviously life-changing for him. And yet he still has a regular job and works on the side on the weekends, playing music as well. So. It didn't change permanently for him, but there's a lot of stories out there of these musicians that have supported the big name acts at Motown and Shaka Khan and some of these other folks all throughout that have worked with these people that have great insight and amazing talent, get asked again and again to go on these national tours, but have decided to still stay here. Galen McKinney talked about the Detroit scene. She said it's not like other cities. So she said we actually nurture our young, which was really nice to hear. Now, obviously, she had some famous people in her life from her father's generation, but she said that her father told her, we don't let you out, meaning on the stage, unless you know what you are doing. So she was talking about, you can't go around sounding like crap, is what she said. So she wanted to make sure that you were fully educated and sounding good by the time you leave up out of here. So I thought it was funny that he said that to me, but now she really appreciates it. So that mentoring and that camaraderie has been a big theme that we've seen. Brad Hales, who, like I said, is a musician and also a record store owner, he said he saw rock and roll get really, really huge and recede in his lifetime. So he's seen some major differences, much like we did with the Motown era. So there was a point where it seemed like rock was kind of dead, when punk had gotten too metal and rock and roll just wasn't in its healthy state. But it's almost kind of got back to its roots in a good way during the late 80s. And he talks about the electrifying mojo, playing music and giving that venue and that dissemination of music to more of a population. He also makes reference to the Cass Corridor, which I thought would be of interest since we're right on the edge here. So he said that it used to be the cultural center down here. You always had a lot of different venues and places like Alvin's, Zoot's Coffee, etc. And that, you know, folks like the MC5, which is a famous rock and roll band, would be playing at the Unitarian Church with Sun Ra. So, you know, that kind of, again, cross-pollination among genres and folks is really interesting. And we had one Motown musician talk about the fact he was roommates with Mitch Ryder when they were trying to make it. So, you know, again, that cross-pollination. One night they were short a player and they grabbed Mitch and dragged him on the stage to fill in. So, you know, all of that I think makes their experience richer and what they produce richer. So Matt Smith from Outrageous Cherry had a long story about how he lived in LA for a while and he just came back here because he felt that Detroit was a better environment for him. And he said, you know, all the musicians that I've worked with out of Detroit, they really are the best musicians in the world. This city, for whatever reason, produces these kinds of individuals that have a really different way of working, just a different vibe than people from other places. So he really sees, once again, amazing musicians. And just, I'll put a little pitch in. One of the people in his band is one of my students who just graduated from our program too. So we work with Maria. We've been working with, she's been providing some context for us. So putting this in a little bit more academic framework, on the left I have sort of general reasons that people mentioned that they felt like Detroit was really fruitful for them and it was important for them to stay. So the number of venues, depending on time frame, was really important. The raw talent came up a lot. The entrepreneurial culture here. The support of fellow musicians and the venues. Diversity of culture, which we've indicated. The conversation of culture, as McKinley Jackson was talking about in translating that into music, and mentoring were things that we saw over and over again. And so, of course, as a librarian, I had to categorize that. So I categorized it in kind of two main areas, which is the culture of entrepreneurship, which creates all of that, you know, possibility for success. And then also, you know, the talent. And I know a lot of people have thought about, you know, the influences from all the southern migration we had to work in the auto industry, and so all of that music that came up and that was integrated with the northern music became, you know, northern soul, so that was a lot of input. So certainly every person had a very different perception about what is success for them, as well as how they got there. So we certainly didn't interview, you know, only people that were, you know, of Diana Ross's success level. We interviewed people all along the gamut. And some people really didn't want to have that success. They want to play for their community, and that is satisfactory to them. And it's a very sort of loving, supportive community, and that makes a good, happy life for them. And we heard that a lot. And then some people were bitter about not having made it, and not understanding sort of how fate picks and chooses. And certainly the genre, the context they had affected, you know, their perception and their success. So my brief conclusion is, you know, I looked at, you know, I was trying to think, okay, what do they have in common? Is there anything else I can reach for. So I turned, professionally to Wordle. And I input some of the transcriptions we did, and it comes up with this kind of map of terms that are used. And I did it 3 times, and you see how different these are, and how packed they are. There's really not a common thread. I mean, it's really very different, very, very, very different perceptions and experiences that these folks had. But I'm so pleased that they've been sharing them with us. The only thing I would say that they might have had in common was talent and hustle. These people are really all universally hardworking, passionate people. Like I said, there is no retirement in store for them. They will continue to keep working until their last breath, for sure. You might reach different conclusions in examining the oral histories. We do deposit those at the Reuther Library for other researchers to utilize. And so I'm going to put you on the spot. Allison is here, who just found out she'll be managing that collection. So as they, yeah, but as they'll be processing those collections and making them available to researchers, you can feel free to look to interpret that as well. I did want to thank, I'll play this in a second. I have some links here. I can make that available from some of the folks, from some of their music. And I just wanted to thank, obviously, the Reuther for housing the oral histories and preserving them going forward. Melvin Davis, who continues to connect me to folks. Our students have done an amazing job. And Mike Dukevich is the student who connected me to Melvin Davis and Ed Wolfram initially. And Mike has graduated from our program now. He's a librarian here at Wayne State and a DJ. So his expertise has really been invaluable. So that's it.
Questions, comments?
Yeah.
How do you decide you're going to interview?
If they pick up the phone, no, I'm just kidding. It is quite a task, and because we're doing these things, I'm just going to play a little Dennis here if I can. You stay required. I do, because it's just a semester-long class, and sometimes it can take a very, very long time to arrange things and vet people. I don't put that burden on my students, so I vet them for the students and then I assign them someone. So I really work off other subject experts giving me recommendations, and then I go do research on those people and see basically 2 things. One, if I think they have interesting stories to tell, but also if they've been if they have not been well documented, because we don't want to do stories, on people that have been interviewed so extensively and it's already out there. We want to give unique material to the Reuther to house, and sometimes we'll see people that are fairly famous and they've been interviewed, but they're only interviewed about their next album coming out, not about sort of how they got there or who else they know. And in an immediate interview is very different from an oral history. In the oral history, they can throw around a lot of names and we can do background research and sort of cross-reference that and tie that together. So they're more free with that. So it's really, so I go through that process, and then I guess there is a third thing, and the third thing is really if I can get hold of them. Because it is very difficult, especially musicians, they tour a lot. So it's very difficult to nail them down for interviews sometimes. And a lot of them are obviously night owls because of what they do. So, they've only got certain time, and if our students work 9 to 5, and, so there's some jiggling around for that. So, Michael?
Kim, one of the things you had up there about commonalities was acceptance of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to hear you talk about that a little bit more, about how they talked about how that influenced the music. Because if you listen to any kind of music from Detroit, generally you'll hear that in there. And my theory is that's why it makes it appealing to people in the UK. One of the things that makes it appealing is that you've got a whole range of what America is, and you've got that respect in the music for each genre and each race and ethnicity that contributed to the culture.
I think that's a great observation, Michael. And we heard that like in the Mitch Ryder story, that they were teasing him. He was the only white boy in the building, but you know, they respected his ability, and so of course he could fill in, and there isn't that discrimination in the music world. And I definitely, in the interviews we've done, it's not a huge amount of interviews, but we have never ever had anybody indicate any kind of discriminatory practice. It's completely based on your talent. And so if you can play, you know, 3 genres, you're going to get pulled into all 3 genres. And so there's no, that's a white genre, that's a black genre. You just don't see that, which is really refreshing and a beautiful thing. So I think that's what we're seeing. So, anybody else?
I'm kind of interested in the difference between, Chicago is a blues town, Detroit is a Motown. And to what extent is that because of the migration patterns? People who came from Mississippi brought the blues with them.
Sure.
And,
yeah, but I think what I heard from the musicians is they felt, Chicago blues was different than Detroit blues. And so maybe it goes back to what Peter Jackson was indicating, which is kind of when you're raised on the same soil, together, that you're interpreting the music a similar way. And so though you have diverse family backgrounds from all over, that add to the sound, you kind of speak the same musical language. So there's regional differences.
I was just struck throughout your talk, having recently read Bruce Springsteen autobiography, where he's talking about his formative years in Asbury Park, and so much of that same theme comes up. Diversity of venues, like there are a zillion places to play. Black and white are playing together. Musicians are going to each other's shows. Any kind of musical style can be found there, and it influences the way they play at their next show. It's a much smaller community, but he's very clear that you couldn't do what we were doing there in any neighboring community. There was something about that place that kind of brought it all together. So as a non-Detroit native, the sort of, there's almost a bit of homer as well. Detroit couldn't happen anywhere. It could happen in London.
We realize there's a
but it can't happen everywhere. And I think that you're really onto something with picking out the sort of last couple of slides and picking out these themes that are, if not unique to Detroit, are certainly elemental in building that community that Detroit clearly has, and not every. I also struck with the Chicago statement that everyone's trying to get ahead of everyone else, whereas here everyone's going to each other's shows.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that every key musical community has these elements. So whether it's Asbury Park or Detroit, that's definitely true. I mean, most musicians, I saw something the other day, the average income in the U.S. for average musician is $16,000 a year. So if they aren't going to be really well off financially, then it takes a village of them to support each other.
And the ability to sleep on somebody's garage floor.
Exactly.
And that's acceptable.
Yeah, right.
I can attest to the diversity and the importance of that in Detroit. My dad is 94 years old, and he grew up with his friends hanging out in Detroit in Black Bottom, in the district, with all the great music coming out of the Black Bottom district in Detroit. And he told me sometimes him and his friend would be the only white guys in there, but they knew how to dance, and all the women wanted to dance with them. And it was just, there was no issue with that. I mean, and that we're going back a long time. So Detroit has had those roots, and I think it's a testament to how we all get along today.
My idea of the perfect example of Detroit's diversity in music is funkadelic, because acid funk did not happen anywhere else on the planet. It happened here, and then Ohio Players and Gap Band and other people started taking from them. And, you know, they played with acid rock, white suburban kids, and so they picked it up, and Clinton and his guitarists just started making crazy stuff.
Yeah, right, innovating. Yeah, it was a great fertile ground for it, for sure. Anybody else?
I know you talked a little bit earlier about the challenge of, you know, managing a project like this. I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on a project such as this that leans heavily on students, and it's a multi-year project, and for those of us who are also interested in developing these sort of grassroots community student researcher-led projects, you know, takeaways that you have.
I think that you have to have somebody that's really willing to work with the community. So there's a lot of time that whoever's managing it has to spend out in the community, you know, building relationships just like a field archivist would. So I'm out. I have to go to the Raven. Unfortunately, it's a huge sacrifice, but you know, I have to go. You know, I have to like a couple times a semester all year round because the class is only offered once a year. I make sure I make the rounds in the musical community to just hand out my card and make sure they know that I'm interested in their story. And I don't usually meet with someone once. I want to make sure they see me at their shows a couple of times so that they trust me and that I'm trying to look out for them. And I'm not trying to just steal their story from them, but I'm trying to make sure that we're, you know, treating with honor. And sometimes students go. So I think there's a lot of community building you have to do in order to be entrusted with that. And that's true whether it's the musical community or the environmental activists. You know, they certainly want to know that you want them to empower them to tell their own story, and that it's not your story to tell. It's not going to be, you know, the full oral history is not edited in any way except for some ums and so's we might, you know, edit out in the transcript. But, you know, for the entire, they can speak of whatever they're comfortable about. It's not an interview. It's not an interrogation. And so they speak about, they need to know that they can feel comfortable to discuss whatever they want. It's their story. So I think that that's a little different for most people because they're used to, say, you know, a journalist is trying to get a specific piece of information and they have to really root around for it. And for us, we're just kind of like, sure, whatever you want to talk about, but here's a general guideline. You know, we'll need to know a little bit about your background and a little bit, you know, but it's your story. And so that comfort level is a big deal, but it's also a lot of logistical work. So you've got to make sure, you know, you've got consistent file naming conventions so the transcript can be tied back to the recordings. You've got to make sure you have an uncompressed recording and a smaller compressed recording so that you can, you know, put that up somewhere. You've got to make sure you have backups and you're preserving those backups so that, you know, they're around for hopefully the next generation. So there's a lot of logistical work, and, you know, hopefully you can put it in a, you know, create a record, searchable record and put it in a database. So, you know, there's a lot of that traditional archival and library science behind it as well.
I have a comment on the presentation. I like, you know, the PowerPoint and whatnot, even though the print was kind of tiny. Could you have a picture of the speaker that you're talking, like the musician Motown that you're speaking with back then, like when they used to look young, and then how they look now, so we could try to like connect? Because I'm from San Antonio, Texas, so I didn't know any of the Motown artists that you're referring to until you said like Chaka Khan or you know, somebody big name. So I would like to know, you know, what did they look like? Because, you know, you usually dress like the genre that you perform.
Yeah, we had not, when I started, we hadn't been gathering headshots of folks. We do have some, but I want to start doing that now. And I was going to work with Allison to figure out how we want to present the material so we can gather that. But it's a good point.
Yeah.
Carlton?
I can. Sorry, I was late.
That's all right.
FA building is not good construction.
Yeah.
Apologize.
Yeah.
Just one thing, the listening archive at the Mike Kelly is happening right now. I don't know if you know about it, the mobile homestead.
Yeah.
And it's a really nice in terms of visualization, I know Wayne State has websites and this stuff is findable, but I know it has another way. There's screens and headphones and sort of other ways to represent. Because the work you've done is unbelievable. And I was a college teacher too at one point, and keeping engaged community engagement while you're trying to do this stuff is nearly impossible. And Kim has been working with Detroit Sound Conservancy for a number of years on making available students on similar projects, and you should be, I hope you feel over the time, my question to you would be, feel free to throw people under the bus if you need to, but what, do you feel like you've gotten the appropriate administrative support and university support for these efforts over time? And do you think the larger university sees the value of this kind of community outreach and historical sort of perspective? Do you, over the years, do you have a sense that Wayne is encouraging of this work?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, certainly Dr. Edwards is, and it's fantastic. This is the first time I've presented on it, so I haven't really asked for any infrastructure at all. So I don't know yet. I mean, maybe I have to answer that in 6 months. I've been busy collecting, and now we're starting to disseminate. So WDT has contacted me, and they want to play a bunch of clips, and so I'll be working with them on Culture Shift. So, but I just haven't asked for anything because I wanted to gather enough stories that were worth talking about first. So I'm just a baby starting this now.
You're undercutting it. You're not a baby at this. You've been doing it for years, and you've got it now. There's a whole generation. Like even in the time we've done it, we've only existed for 5-6 years, but I've probably worked with 10 of your students, maybe. So now I'm this like little, So I hope you continue to get the administrative support that you need and deserve.
Oh, thank you, Carl.
Yeah.
Thank you.